here today. My name is Antonio Condorelli. I'm a postdoc at EGC Lab, Orsay, France. And today I would like to talk about our work called Observational Constraint on Cosmic Rays Escape from Ultra Energy Accelerator. Is also like on behalf of the other collaborator, which is Quentin, Sullivan, Jonathan, and Olivier. This work is already available here, and you can find it, and it was already submitted and accepted to APJ. I would like to start like just showing something that probably you should know. So the ultra energy cosmic rays measurement, in particular the spectrum that we know is already measured with super precise. We can find some features that are well known, which are the ankle at 18.7, then at 10 to 18.7, then the suppression at the highest energies, and in the middle we find the instep, which is the new features that still to study. On the other hand, for what concerns mass composition, is a much more complicated studies because we cannot perform an event-by-event analysis due to the uncertainties of the first interaction points. And for this reason, what we measure are distribution, that also this we already speak about, in which for each energy bin, we collect, say like the depth of the shower maximum. Unfortunately, this is not really user-friendly. In fact, this plot is never shown. What we saw this morning and also in this session is normally this plot, in which if the red line corresponds to a pure proton composition for different hadronic interaction model, the blue line corresponds to a pure iron composition from different hadronic interaction model again, the Auger data are these black dots. So you can see that we goes from a intermediate to light components around the ankle, and then to lights to heavy. So our question, what we want to try to study is why we observe these features in both spectrum and composition. It is possible to relate what we see to some astrophysical process. You know, we can study this in terms of source. And the answer that was already done like some years ago is that if we combine the two measurements, it is possible to provide a simple astrophysical scenario. This was explored among other works inside this paper, theoretical collaboration, where assuming that all the sources are point-like, identical, and also uniformly distributed, it is assumed that they can accelerate 5 representative masses. So in this case, hydrogen, helium, nitrogen, silicon, and iron. Then it is possible to consider an injection spectrum given by a simple power law with a rigidity cutoff. Rigidity cutoff means that once you define a maximum energy for protons, I mean, it's charge dependent. So for example, an iron will be accelerated 26 times that energy. Then these injected flux are propagated through the universe. I highlight propagated because even if we accelerate 5 injected mass, at the end what arrive at Earth is the entire spectrum of all the particles, and then fitted to the Auger energy spectrum and composition. Of course, it's a fit, so the 3 parameters are the normalization of the injection spectrum, the spectral index, the rigidity cutoff, and the relative abundance. And of course, the idea is that we want to minimize deviance, so we want to perform a maximum comparison between the two. What was found in terms of interpretation of this work is that we can explain ultra energy cosmic rays in terms of nuclei. So there are not protons anymore, but we need to accelerate nuclei with a hard injection spectrum. Again, this is something that it was a novelty at the time because hard injection spectrum means e to the -1, while diffuse shock acceleration predict more or less e to the -2. And in addition, the suppression, so the suppression at the highest energy, is given both by interaction of ultra energy cosmic rays with a cosmic microwave background, and also by limiting the maximum energy that an accelerator can give to the ultra energy cosmic rays. In the current scenario, we need just a few EV in order to have this explanation. Of course, one weak point of this model is that cannot explain all the part below the ankle. And so if you want to explain this feature at 10 to the 18.7, you have to take into account other astrophysical scenario. For example, in a paper by Aloisio, Brzezinski and Blasi, take into account a second component that described here. what we want to know is that if with the data that we have here, we can extend minimally this scenario in order to have an information to what happened below the angle. And as I say, with this astrophysical model, we can't, but we have an information about what happened below. I mean, just take into account the distribution that I showed before. There's a tool that I'm not going to detail, it's called the fraction fit, that tell us which are the mass fraction that we are required at each energy. And so basically take into account 4 representative masses that here are proton, helium, nitrogen, and iron. One can have an estimation of what is required. For example, at 10 to the 18, if we take 10 to the 18 and take EPOS, which are the red dots, we can see that we can describe the mass distribution that we have with more or less 60% of protons, no helium, 40% of nitrogen, and basically no iron. And interesting, what happened when we combine all of this, what we see is that we have a kind of hierarchically order of abundance. So it seems that in our data, we see first a bump of proton, then a bump of helium, then a bump of nitrogen, which so say encourage us in using like this rigid dependent scenario, because it seems that the abundance are hierarchically ordered. But the reason why this is pretty useful for us is because we can use it to take into account which are the proton fractions in our spectrum. So if we take the total spectrum, which is the black dots, and we multiply for the fraction of protons that we taken from the fraction fit, we get basically what are the protons expected in our spectrum, which you might see are kind of compatible with a Cascade Grande light component. And what we can do now is to redo the same exercise that we did before, but take into account a fit of both spectrum and composition for energy above the angle, so in this region, and then take into account also the proton spectrum at lower energy. So try to describe also the black dots, say here, and the red dots here. What we found is that if we use the same scenario as before, the deviance significantly is really, really worse. Instead, give one more free parameter, which is the spectral index of the protons, which we assume to be different with respect to the spectral index of the other nuclei. What we get a deviance which is similar, mostly the same for what we get before. And this result is pretty robust because it does not depend on the hadronic interaction models, does not depend on all the possible, does not depend on the over density correction. Is how to say, like it seems really like I mean is a new result. And in particular, the fact that we get a hard injection spectrum for heavy nuclei at high energy, and a soft injection spectrum for light element, in this case for proton, at lower energy, it's a clear hint that this can be interpreted as an interaction at the source. There are different papers already discussed this, but what happened is, it was already studied, that if you have an accelerator and you have an environment surrounding the accelerator itself, this environment acts as a filter, allowing the high energy particle to escape with basically no interactions, while the lower is the energy, the more they have to interact, lose energy, lose mass, and produce a pile-up of protons of light particle at low energy with a softer injection spectrum. This is like other work that already like discussed it, but what is new, and I think what is really a novelty in this field, and what we bring in this work, are these points. So first, with respect to other work, we did a fit, and actually is a good fit. I mean, most of the work that I listed before, like I'm normally just start to explain, or the fit is not so good. Then, in order to do this, we take into account the X max distribution as mass estimator, which has a more complete information with respect to just the mean and the X max. So it's pretty hard also to get a good deviance using X max distribution. And third things, as I say, this reconstruction of the extragalactic component made of protons is completely, say, driven by data. So like normally what is done here, what is done in other model, is that consider that you cannot describe the low energy part using only protons. What you can do is normally include a galactic component, a second component, and of course you can have an interference of these two. Instead, here is completely taken from the data. In addition, what we get looking, of course, at this measurement is the fact that our data, so data object, strongly doesn't like an iron component. So in this region, we expect to have the transition between galactic and extragalactic cosmic rays. And if we assume, say, electromagnetic mechanism, one should expect that the end of the galactic spectrum should be made of iron. But iron in this data does or is subdominant or is completely absent. Instead, our data requires say another contribution of intermediate nuclei, and what does it mean in terms of astrophysical interpretation is still under discussion. Then we also check the flux of cosmogenic neutrinos. We found this order of magnitude below what R³ measure, and so we are safe in this sense. It would be interesting to study what are the associated flux from neutrino flux from sources, but in this case, of course, a detailed, so a modeling of the source, of the required source is in this case is needed. And of course, future observation and future analysis hopefully will help us to describe and to better define these in-source interactions, and so to shed lights on this region of ultra-energy cosmic rays data. So thank you very much for your attention.